welcome into the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. Today is Wednesday, but we're publishing this on Friday, February the 14th. So happy Valentine's Day to everybody out there. And we are also wishing you a happy opening day for LSU baseball season. And that is why we're here. I'm with advocate LSU baseball beat writer Koki Riley, as well as our lead sports columnist in Baton Rouge. That's Scott Rabalais. And Koki, you and I did the part one of the LSU baseball preview last week, and we kind of went through lineup possibilities, going through the roster, starting rotation, all of that stuff. And I think we'll start there in a minute because there are some updates to that, some confirmations. But today's podcast is more of a big picture. LSU's like number 2 or number 3 in the preseason polls, depending on where you look. Is that realistic? And just maybe going through the schedule and finding out how good this Tigers team can be. So first of all, Koki, LSU opens the season Friday night against Indiana, Purdue, Fort Wayne.
Yes.
The Mastodons, as we were talking about off air. The only school in the country with a wonderful mascot of the Mastodon. Give us some updates from last week, from what you said last week. I know, like, the big news, Stephen Milam is going to play shortstop and bat leadoff, but we also have a starting rotation, all of that stuff.
Yeah, Stephen Milam's going to be the shortstop, and Michael Braswell is going to be the third baseman. Braswell was the starting shortstop last season, and Milam was the starting second baseman last season. And, you know, part of that was because Milam was just a freshman, and you already had a guy like Tommy White at third base. But now with Tommy White out of the equation, and given how impressive Milam was defensively last season, it just made sense to shift Milam over to shortstop, given that he's probably your best defensive infielder in the first place, and then to move Braswell over to third base. And we're not 100% sure as to how well Braswell's going to transition over to third defensively. He played 7 games there when he was at South Carolina. I believe that was his sophomore year. But we know with Milam at shortstop that he can do it. He played there a little bit last season, but he also just has the speed and the quickness to really take advantage of his range at that position, and that's a very, very important element of that position. That and arm strength, and he has really good arm strength. He might have the strongest arm among all the infielders on this team, except for him or maybe Jared Jones, but. Even though that sounds kind of odd because he's a first baseman, but he's also a former catcher. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, yeah, that's kind of the situation at shortstop and third base.
Rab, I see you spying the lineup there.
Admiring Koki's handiwork, yes.
And we can use this maybe to transition a little bit into the talk about expectations. On paper, this looks like a very good team, especially a very good offensive team.
A team with depth, with hitting, with depth of pitching. We were talking to Jay Johnson today. He said they were having some kind of drill, and he said he had like 3 players at one position and 2 players at another position and 3 at another one. He's like, I'd be happy with any of these guys being the starters. So that's that probably speaks well to what they're trying to do. But it's a meat grinder, the SEC, as in most sports. You to be ranked number 2 or 3 in the country is great, but there's 5 or 6 other teams in the top 10. Or I think I counted in one poll 6 of the top 13 were SEC teams.
Yeah, it's like 6 of the top 10 or something like that.
It's pick your poison. Every weekend's going to be a battle, and you could have a very good team and go 500 in the conference, and certainly be a team that could still make it to Omaha. So it's every game counts, and as they say, and I think it's really true this year. But they have the makings of a team that could go far, and eclipse what they did last year, and maybe be knocking on the door of what they did in 2023, which is win it all.
Yeah, I mean, I actually this graphic we have up on the screen right now, I started it with, what are LSU's expectations realistic considering they're number 2 or number 3, and I kind of went back and rewrote it because at LSU you always expect to be in Omaha. I mean, that's like what the fan base expects. I think that's at this point what Jay Johnson and his staff expect, and what the players expect.
Yeah. And just given the amount of talent they have, that's what they should expect. They don't have as many returning stars or returning starters, especially on the pitching side, as maybe you'd like to have. But if you just look at the names, you look at the caliber of transfers they brought in, you look at the caliber of freshmen they brought in, they have the most talented freshman class in the country. I don't think it's a hot take to say that at all. And, combine that with some of the returners that they do have, and you're looking at a team that should make it to Omaha. Like, they are one of the most talented teams in the country, whether it's top 5 or top 3. That's that's a lot more that's a lot more subjective, but it's undeniable that they have a top 8 team on paper.
And it's not just luck, involved once you get there, but it really is. That is the achievement to make it to Omaha, to be one of those 8 teams. Once you get there, things can go break your way or not break your way. I mean, LSU probably wins the 2017 national championship if one of their starting pitchers doesn't get hurt and is out of there. If they can get to the last game against Florida instead of getting swept in the first 2 games, and you never know. And of course, they've had games where they walked off a couple of national championships, in 1996 and 2000. But to get to Omaha, you look at this team. Whenever it's LSU, you look at, does this team have the makings of a team that can get to Omaha or not? And you certainly have to say right now, as much as anyone in the country, they do.
I mean, even 2 years ago, with as talented as that LSU team was, they went into that College World Series slight underdogs to Wake Forest, and Wake Forest, I mean, it came down to an elimination game, easily could have knocked them out. And you need to have a little bit of luck go your way when you get there. But as you say, you need to get there, and I do think the depth's an important point, because you are going to have some injuries. I mean, what kind of any sports season, but especially a baseball season where you're playing 4 games a week, you're going to have some injuries, and so you need to have that depth, or else you can see your season get sidetracked real quick. I
think that's a good point, because in part because like last season they were pretty healthy. Like, all things considered, that no one fell to Tommy John surgery. I mean, they had a couple injuries, nicks and knacks here and there with the positional player group, guys who are kind of playing hurt, like an Ethan Fry, for example. But they were pretty healthy. Like the Luke Holman, Gage Jump, those guys stayed healthy throughout the whole year. Tommy White stayed healthy throughout the whole year.
Going to start knocking on wood.
Obviously everyone just to start knocking on wood, because we don't want to see injuries, no matter who it happens to. But I don't know. It's just something to keep in mind as we go through the season. Like the starting lineup that they have on Friday, and probably even the rotation that they have to start this weekend, it's probably not going to be the one that they end the season with, especially with the starting lineup.
No, but having said that about the rotation, we should hit on that, because Jay Johnson did say at least to start the season, what his weekend rotation is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Cade Anderson is going to be the Friday starter. Anthony Ianson is going to be the Saturday starter. And then Chase Shores is going to be the Sunday starter. Cade Anderson is their leading pitcher in terms of innings pitched from last season. And this is a guy who started a lot of midweek games last year, really impressed in those midweek games, but, hit a bit of a rough patch in the middle of the year once they got the SEC play, but then, really sort of found his stride again as a reliever in the postseason, the SEC tournament, in the regional. So his fastball's a little bit harder now. He added a really good bullet slider to go along with his curveball, which is already one of the best pitches in the team. So he's got 3 really good pitches, 3 improved pitches, and he throws everything for strikes. So he's looked as dominant as any pitcher that they've had, and was one of the few pitchers that pitched well this past weekend when the hitters really sort of figured things out last weekend during their preseason scrimmages. So it made sense that he was the Friday starter. This was not a big surprise.
No.
And then Saturday's going to be Anthony Ianson. I thought he was going to be the Sunday guy, but it makes sense to put him as the Saturday guy, just given some of the kinks and some of the consistency that Chase Shores is trying to work through at the moment. But with Ianson, UC San Diego transfer, 4 pitches for strikes, pitched for the U.S. Collegiate National Team this summer briefly. Talented guy, 3.07 ERA, 82 innings. Again, throw strikes. So he's a very solid and logical choice for that Saturday spot. And then for Sunday, it's Chase Shores, and it's there's a little bit of risk involved there because some of the command issues he's had so far this preseason, the fact that he's coming off Tommy John surgery, he's missed the last year and a half. But it's 100 miles an hour on a Sunday. So it's if he clicks by the time they reach SEC play, it's as good of a Sunday starter as you could possibly ask for. So so far it's a pretty good looking rotation, and they have options in the bullpen who they can move into the rotation if need be.
At least they're not in a position, right, Koki, where it looks like, oftentimes you get to a Sunday, he's like, we're just going to throw some guys out there. We're just going to throw,
Yeah.
we're
Those
gonna
lazy
pitch
Sunday afternoons with Chase Shores buzzing your tower at 100 miles an hour.
7 or 8 guys. But I mean, they at least have a plan right now. And like you said, will his command hold up or not? But they're not like, we don't know who the Sunday starter is going to be. They have options there. And if not him, then maybe one or two.
That's been an issue for them the last 2 years, and part of that's because I think a lot of that, if we're being really honest, is some of the inconsistencies of Thatcher Hurd, because he figured to be one of those 3 starters the last 2 years, and then he figured it out the second half of 2023 out quite obviously, and they don't win the national championship without him. But some of the struggles that he had last season kind of took him out of the rotation, and now all of a sudden it's just Gage Jump and Luke Holman, and now you're holding on for dear life on those Sundays. And Griffin Herring was one of your 3 best pitchers, but you needed to keep him in the bullpen or to close out those first 2 games earlier in the weekend. So it became like a whole thing last season. And maybe they have that all solved this year, and they have more than just 3 strong options to start.
Yeah, so we've established here that the expectations are Omaha, and I would say competing for an SEC regular season title. The schedule's unbalanced. I mean that all could come down to necessarily maybe who you play and whether you can get hot at the right time, sort of thing. But look, LSU is in every preseason poll. I'm just scrolling through some of them, is either number 2 or number 3. Texas A&M is pretty much a consensus number 1, and then LSU and Virginia are either 2 or 3 in one order or the other. So those are the expectations. Let's go through the schedule a little bit and talk non-conference. Then we'll do kind of an SEC preview, and we'll finish up with maybe some of the things LSU is going to have to overcome if it does get to Omaha. Okay, so non-conference schedule. Talking on Wednesday's podcast with Reed Darcy about the way Kim Mulkey schedules LSU's women's basketball schedule, somewhat similar here in that it's not that it's all easy games, but Jay Johnson's schedule has really allowed the Tigers to. I like to think of it as like they're learning games, right? Like you can get away with stuff and still win most of these games.
Yeah.
We talked about Indiana, Purdue, Fort Wayne. They play Omaha. They play Southern. I mean, they do have some games, Koki, K-State, Dallas Baptist. Like it's not like they're playing all cupcakes or anything like that. I'm not saying that, but there are a lot of opportunities to sort of see what you got and still probably win most of them.
Yeah, Jay Johnson, he does not take the Brian Kelly tack to where you're playing a really tough opponent early in the season.
Starting with Virginia.
Yeah.
Starting with that.
Let's start with Virginia. They don't do that.
Maybe Brian Kelly should take the Jay Johnson tag. That's a podcast for another day. I'm sorry.
I mean,
Koki does football too, and that's a topic that comes up.
Yes. But if we're talking about the baseball season, then it's a weekend or 2 of teams that they should definitely beat and that they're way more talented than, and then it's a sort of road trip, 3 or 4 game trip to Texas, whether it's in Houston or this year it's in Dallas, and they'll play at least one team that's going to make a regional or even host a regional, and then 2 or 3 other teams that may make the postseason. And they have the same sort of situation this year, where last year they went to Houston. They played Rice in a true road game, and then they played 3 games at the Astros Park, and one of them was against Texas. So like that was like a big game, right? And this year the big game was against Dallas Baptist at the Rangers ballpark in a midweek game, and before they play 3 in Frisco against Kansas State, Nebraska, and Sam Houston. So that's kind of like those are going to be kind of like the big games to watch, I guess, in the non-conference play before conference play starts out.
Rab, do you agree with this? I mean, like it's hard to say. Obviously, it's worked for Jay Johnson throughout his career. It allows them to build into SEC play. I do think there's a little bit of a danger that you kind of get. You get into SEC play and you go, whoa, okay, this is completely different. Although
that's kind of what happened last year.
Yeah. Now, completely, we'll get into the SEC schedule in a minute. Completely beyond anybody at LSU's control. They don't set the conference schedule. They open with Missouri, who's probably the weakest team in the SEC, and so you kind of do get to ramp up. But I do find it interesting that you play in such a tough league and you choose to prepare for it by tilting toward the easier side of scheduling.
That's there are a lot of different ways to look at scheduling, and obviously with LSU football, we've seen them just start out with this huge game that's a coin flip, at best, and then you have with we've seen with Kim Mulkey in women's basketball and with baseball here, it's like you should win most of these games. Maybe you help them build cohesion. Like you can make the argument either way. I think what you're saying is, does it prepare you for a real meat grinder of a conference or not? Maybe not as much as it could be, but this is a team with a lot of new pieces, a lot of new faces, coming in that they need to, chemistry is an overlooked thing. You look at talent, you look at the number of pitches he can throw. Can he, does he have power from, does he hit for power to all fields? Can he make the throw from third to first? But chemistry is a thing that they have to build. And I think that's something that this schedule gives them a chance to do without losing too much confidence. So, it's not the most stem-winding, thrilling schedule you've ever seen in terms of the non-conference schedule. But I'll tell you one thing: you're going to want the wins to pile up, and you see how where do they do net or just RPI in baseball?
It's RPI.
It's RPI.
That's the main one.
You'll see where RPI comes into play, with the non-conference teams you play. So, in terms of the NCAA tournament and seeding and that sort of thing, It's probably the best way to go this year, even if it's not the most exciting way to go.
And I'm glad you mentioned RPI. And I think one of the correct me if I'm wrong, since you're on the women's basketball team more than I am. But one of the differences in scheduling, between what Jay does and what Kim Mulkey does is that. What Jay does is that he picks out these, quote unquote, weaker opponents from these smaller conferences, but the teams in these smaller conferences have a history of being good. So if they beat that team, it'll help their RPI standing because they faced a team that, ended up making the tournament as a 4 seed. So like 2 years ago, a good example of this is they faced Central Connecticut State for like a 3-game series. And it seemed kind of silly that they were playing Central Connecticut State because they were winning these games like 26-2. But while Central Connecticut State ended up making the tournament as a 4 seed because they won their smaller league. Yeah. So it's stuff like that's kind of what Jay likes to do. He likes to pick out teams where, let's be honest, they're going to at least win the series, if not win all these games comfortably. But these teams that they're playing are good teams within their league, so it'll help out their RPI or their KPI ranking later down the line.
Yeah, that's probably a little better. The LSU women, they have 11 quadrant 4 victories.
Yeah,
out of 25. So that's not. They played a lot of bad teams.
Another parallel to the Lady Tigers, though, I would say is and Reed has said this before. Kim Mulkey doesn't care if she's a 3 seed or a 1 seed. Not terribly. I mean, I'm sure she'd prefer the 1 if it came down to it. But her goal is to get to host those first 2 games. And in baseball, that's similar to, hey, if we're a regional host and even a super regional host, does it matter so much if we're 6 or 3 or 1? I mean, I don't think it does.
No.
And that's what you're talking about.
National seed?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to get in the top 8.
Yeah. If you're in the top 8 and you're guaranteed hosting all the way to Omaha, if you're the 1 seed, you're going to play the 16 instead of the 9 on paper, but upsets happen, and you don't know.
It matters even less in baseball because a lot of it's like
baseball,
you're picking. Maybe you're about to say this, but like a lot of the teams that are picked for each regional are based on how close you are to geographically. It doesn't really matter about like where you are in the pecking order 1 through 64.
And you may want to. If you're 1, maybe you get the 16 seed, but that's an SEC rematch that you'd rather avoid. And if it's 8 versus 9, you're facing an ACC team that you feel like you can match up better. I don't know. I mean, like, to me, worrying about RPI to that level and saying, boy, we got to get a top 3 national seed is you're kind of missing the forest for the trees there. Like, it's not that important as long as you have a good season. So that's sort of the non-conference. And again, it opens this weekend. We're recording Wednesday. There could be schedule changes. There's rain in the forecast this weekend. We haven't heard of any of those as of yet. But I know, like Koki, you were saying, Arkansas is facing similar weather, and they've already moved their Sunday game into a Friday doubleheader. So they're playing 2 Friday, 1 Saturday. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if LSU does. There's supposed to be a lot of rain Saturday and Sunday. So stay tuned. Check out theadvocate.com/LSU. We're recording Wednesday. We don't know of any changes, but they do open up. So then a month later, they get into SEC play. And as I mentioned, they open at home against Missouri. It's funny, they do play at Texas the week after that, which is difficult. But it's a backloaded SEC schedule.
Yes.
Their last 4 series of the year are, I have them listed here, the other 3 teams in the top 5 nationally, which is Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Arkansas. They play all 3 of those teams. And then the last series is, oh, by the way, at Pulmonary in South Carolina. So
Pulmonary State.
The last 4 weekends of the regular season, fascinating stuff and very difficult stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think South Carolina's quite as strong on paper as they were last year, to be clear, but there's just going to be a lot of emotion that weekend, you know?
That's difficult for a totally different reason.
Yeah, it's a different sort of challenge, and it's on the road, and it's just the weekend before the SEC tournament where you're going to be on the road again. So, I mean, the team is going to be away from home for at least a week, you know, depending on how long they go into the SEC tournament. So it's just going to be a grind, right? Now, it'll be after they play 3 straight weekends of playing top 5 teams in the country. It's like the back half of the schedule is very, very difficult in terms of the SEC, but the front half is a lot of matchups where you're like, they could be good or they could not be good. I don't know. We'll see. Like, it's like Texas, they're going to be interesting. They're in a transition point, new coach under Jim Schlossnagle, but he didn't bring really any of the talent that he had at Texas A&M over to Texas. Again, they're kind of in this interesting transition period. They're like the 18th-ish team in the country. We'll see what they look like. They play Mississippi State at home. We'll see what they look like. They lost a lot of pieces from last year's team. There's not a lot of weekends where it's like, oh, they're definitely going to stop these guys, or wow, it's going to be they're facing a team that's just as talented as them until the back half of the schedule.
I will say something interesting by looking at the schedule. It's still, in case people are wondering, they added Texas and OU, but there's still 30 conference games.
Yes.
So you're playing 2 more teams, or you're
only playing
not
10 of the other 17 teams, right?
No, 10 of the other 15.
10 of the other 15.
We're journalists. Math is not our
They
strong
play
suit.
18 basketball games, but there's 16 teams in the league. Thank you for clarifying that.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
So 10 of the other 15, but that's a full 5. I mean, that's a big difference. That's why I say unbalanced schedule makes a difference.
What's interesting is LSU's playing both Texas and OU. I don't know if that. I mean, obviously
on the road too.
Obviously, that's not the case for a lot of existing SEC teams, not the newcomers, and they're not playing Ole Miss this year, which is interesting. That's so there's no Ole Miss, there's no Vandy, there's no Florida.
Yeah.
On the schedule.
Yeah.
So some of those more traditional powers. I always root for the story, right? I'm not here to be an LSU fan or anything like that. I'm rooting for the story. I hope LSU is going to that last weekend at South Carolina playing for the SEC title, and they got to beat Pulmonary like 2 out of 3. I mean, how interesting would that be? It would be such a cool story.
Yeah. And maybe South Carolina's like fighting for his tournament life or something. It's meaningful on
very
both sides.
very realistic possibility.
I do look at that and think, man, if you're LSU, I think it's Tennessee first, who's preseason number like 5.
Yeah.
Then it's
at A&M
or 4. I think they're actually preseason number 4.
Number 4.
Then it's at A&M, who's preseason number 1 everywhere, and then it's Arkansas, who's preseason number 5, right behind Tennessee everywhere. So after that gauntlet, and before the SEC tournament, which depending on where you are can be important or not. I mean, it depends on where you are in rankings and things like that. Maybe it's not that important, but it's still a big event that players are going to look forward to. Oh, we'll just drop this little trip to Pulmonary's team right in the middle of that. And you can see where mentally, emotionally, not a lot. Well, I don't think there's any players left from Pulmonary's tenure, is there?
Well, there's a lot of players who were recruited by him that are on the team, like Jared Jones, for example.
They know him. Yeah. I mean, there's going to be, and Pulmonary's been around the program.
Yeah, no one played
LSU,
for him.
He wasn't coaching, so they know him. I mean, there's a lot of mental and emotional challenges as well as just the physical challenge.
It might even be more of a mental emotional challenge for Pulmonary specifically, and having to just coach against LSU.
I think he's glad that game's not at the box this year.
No, but it's really interesting. To the point what I was saying earlier, this easily could have been one of those 5 teams that LSU didn't play. But not only are they playing them, they're playing them the last weekend of the season. And I will bring up too, in 2023, they didn't play the Sunday game at Columbia, which they could. They said, the weather's bad. I was in Augusta an hour to the west. They played there that day at the Masters. They could have played. South Carolina kind of wimped out. And we talked to this with Jay Johnson about this, I believe. There's going to be more emphasis on trying to get all the games in, he said, this year. So I hope that's the case. Now, the SEC tournament, right, is different, right? Isn't it all single elimination?
Yes, every team is in this year.
Unusual.
So the last few,
different.
Since they've had...
It's like the softball tournament.
Yeah, since they've had 14... Since they had 14 teams, at least, it was, the bottom 2 teams in the league wouldn't make it to the conference tournament. Now everyone's in the conference tournament. So it's a single elimination to start, and then it becomes a double elimination once you get out of those first game or get out of the first game or 2.
Thing where then it goes back to single elimination,
once you get to the semifinals and the finals.
I need like a handbook to figure out who's at risk of being
strange- it's
eliminated.
Heck, I
in
needed
20
a
days.
handbook in the old format. Now,
we-
I gotta like retrain my brain for the new format.
We cover this stuff for a living, so you can imagine. I sympathize with anybody who doesn't understand like exactly what's going on. But that's neither here nor there. A couple more notes on the SEC schedule. One is that I will say, you guys said, okay, the front half of the schedule are teams on paper that you should beat. When you say that, it's like, well, they're like Oklahoma or Texas is number 18 in the nation. I mean, this is not, if you don't play well, and I would even say a school like Missouri, who is probably going to be 15th or 16th in the SEC, if you don't play well, they are good enough to take a couple of games off you. Like that's just how this league
Everybody's
is.
got an ace. Everybody's got a stud hammer
Zach,
pitch,
no
player.
offense, Missouri's the one team I'd make that exception for.
I mean, I know you say that. But I went to Missouri, but I'm not like a huge follower of their baseball program because no one's a huge follower of their baseball program. But like
poor Missouri, man. Shots are just getting fired.
They did win 7 or 8 SEC games last year, maybe 9. I mean, they took a series off of somebody good. It's not like they're going to go 3-27. They're going to beat some teams, and they'll probably take a series off of somebody. Now, is it going to be LSU in their SEC opener? I certainly wouldn't bank on that.
And it's here too.
I'm just saying, you've got to be on every weekend
for sure.
That's
especially after. I mean, like this is again. There's like a lot of teams like a Mississippi State, an Oklahoma, a South Carolina, a Texas. A lot of teams where you can see them being just as good as LSU by the end of the year, or you could see them missing the tournament.
Right.
So like it's just really hard to tell like where these teams are. A lot of these teams have a lot of new players. So it's just really interesting. I mean, and then there's those 3 Titan matchups where those 3 teams are going to be really really good this year. So it's a very interesting schedule. I don't think it's quite as top heavy as last year, but. Like even like a team like Auburn was very aggressive in the transfer portal this year, and they might be better. They were probably the worst team in the SEC last year, but I think they're probably going to be better this year. And they have to go to Auburn, so like that's not a guarantee. Like last time they went to Auburn 2 years ago, they lost the series. So it's an interesting schedule for sure.
It strikes me as a schedule that should allow LSU to be in contention for the SEC title entering those last 4 series.
Yeah.
Because those are the other teams that should rack up wins. And so that makes for a very interesting like late April and May where the SEC title really could be on the line those 3 weekends. So the other point I was going to make, if you have not listened, you guys mentioned our conversation with Jay Johnson on this show about a month ago. Go back and listen to it. You can find it. I'll put the link in the description. Check that out. It's all on the LSU Tigers at NOLA.com YouTube channel. And while you're at it, subscribe, sign up for notifications, hit the like button. If you're an LSU baseball fan, this is the place to be. We're going to have, pretty much, especially once women's basketball is over. I mean, it's going to be baseball and maybe a little bit of softball all the time and some gymnastics, which that's a hint for later in the show too. Let's wrap up our LSU baseball discussion with this. If the Tigers do not get to Omaha, or if they struggle like they did early in SEC play last year, and if there are roadblocks, what are they likely to be, Koki?
I look at catcher as a potential issue, especially defensively. I think offensively, at least they have the potential to hit there. You maybe not as confident as that as say shortstop or at the outfield where they have a ton of returning players and it's some proven talent there. But I'm not quite as worried about it offensively and more worried about defensively because they have 4 guys, and none of them have ever caught an inning in the SEC before. And that's just a lot to ask when you're coming into this league. And given the stuff that a lot of these guys have on the pitching staff, it's consistency with catching the ball, with blocking the ball especially. They have really good arms in that catching room. A lot of cannons back there, especially with Kade Arambidi, the freshman. But again, he's just a freshman, and Luis Hernandez is probably going to start. But he only played 3 games at catcher last year at Indiana State, so there's a lot of questions with the catching room, especially defensively. And then I just think like with the pitching staff and maybe really with the team overall, it's a lot of players who are talented enough to do this, but will they actually do this? Because we haven't seen it yet, and I think they lost 12 of their top 14 pitchers in terms of innings pitched last season, and they had to go into the portal and add guys like Anthony Ianson or Connor Ware from the junior college ranks, relying on freshmen like William Schmidt and Casey Evans and Maverick Rizzi. Like, can those guys actually step into roles and pitch key innings for this team in SEC play? That's going to be a major question mark. Like, they have the talent to do it, they have the stuff to do it. It's just a matter of just doing it. Then offensively, it's what I just mentioned with some of the unproven pieces, and it's also the power. Like, this team doesn't have as much power as they had last year. Last year, they were 2 power over hit. This year, they're going to be the hitting tool is improved. They're going to put the ball in play more this year. I'd be surprised if they don't. And I think they're probably going to walk more this year, and they'll have a better approach at the plate. But in terms of hitting the ball out of the ballpark and turning 1-run innings into 3-run innings or 4-run innings, that's a part of this team that I'm a little bit concerned about heading into the year, because you have Jared Jones. He's an incredible power hitter. He might get hit over 30 home runs this year. I think he'll be the first LSU player since 2000 to do that. So like that's definitely notable. But then outside of him, I mean, you don't have Tommy White anymore. You don't have Hayden Travinski anymore. You certainly don't have a guy like Dylan Cruz anymore, or Cade Beloso, or all these great power hitters they've had over the last couple of years. And it's a lot of guys who you could see them getting 15 home runs, but we just haven't really seen it at this level yet. So that's kind of a slight concern for me when it comes to the lineup.
Yeah, you talk about it can be frustrating to sit around and wait for the 3-run homer for your offense. I mean, it's very frustrating as a fan, or I'd imagine as a coach, to watch that, where you've got a couple of strikeouts every inning and you put up some zeros. But if that 2 or 3-run homer does come, you can win games with just that. And if that doesn't come, all of a sudden you're working a lot harder to scratch across some. You got to build that picket fence with a lot of ones up on the scoreboard and scratch across some runs.
And Rab, I mean, Rab, you're a golf guy, so you'd understand this reference. Like, you need the big club. You need your driver, right? Like, you need to have all the different clubs in at your disposal offensively, whether it's being able to score runs with small ball, whether it's just getting on base and getting that key single or key double when you need it. That was the sort of the stuff that they struggled with last year, and that consistency from an approach standpoint, from a contact standpoint. But they were good at the power thing. This year, it's a little bit more of the other way around. And do they have enough power in this order to make up for a bad day at the plate? To turn a 1-run inning into a 3-run inning. To really extend leads, to take advantage of the small ballparks that are all across the SEC. So that's kind of my one major question mark with the. I don't even know if it's a major question mark, honestly, because there's a lot of guys who can do it. We just haven't seen them do it, right? Like Jake Brown is a guy who I think could hit 15 home runs this year. We just haven't seen it. Yeah. Katie Beatty has the frame to do it. He's a grown man already, despite being a freshman. But how much is he going to play, and how consistent of a hitter is he going to be at the start? So it's like those are just a couple examples, and really down the line, almost every position, I could see the guy hitting multiple home runs. He's just got to do it, and that's kind of a theme with this team. If you're looking at this team this year, is I know he can do it, but will he do it? That's the best way to sort of simplify this.
I got to ask you about Derek Curiel, because it seems like he's. Correct me if I'm wrong, or if you disagree. He's the most exciting true freshman LSU's had since Dylan Cruz.
Oh man,
I mean, there's a lot expected of him.
There's a lot expected of him in terms of the excitement from a positional player standpoint. You're right.
A positional player,
but because with the pitching side, it's like William Schmidt. Man,
no, I should have said.
And that's also this year. But for the positional players, it's hard to argue the excitement around him heading into this season. And this is a guy who's added 12 to 15 pounds since he's arrived on campus. So you saw him hit a home run this past weekend during the scrimmage. And so if he can get to that power, then that's a 5-tool player potentially, because he's got elite speed. He can play.
He's the guy who passed, was a potential first round pick? Or?
I think if you asked me this a year ago, where is Derek Curiel going to get picked? I'd say definitely in the first round. Mm-hmm. But then I think scouts kind of cooled off of him in the senior year of high school. He didn't really work into his power as much. Mm-hmm. Maybe didn't have as explosive of a senior year as people thought. So he dropped out of the draft a month before the draft started. Yeah. So and just decided to come to school. I think if he went in the draft, he probably would have gone the first 2 or 3 rounds just based on his talent. But at the same time, like, to get a guy like that with that potential, who some people thought a few years ago was the number 1 player in the country out of high school, in that 2024 class, like, he's been famous for a while. And it's for a reason. And you just see that talent, like the speed, the quickness. Again, he can play all 3 positions in the outfield. His contact skills and maturity at the plate are way beyond his years for a freshman. And it is a little Cruisian in terms of the way he can work at bats.
I like that.
Yes. Yeah. Just the way he works at bats and his maturity at the plate. And Jay Johnson said this today, and he said it a few times already. He might be the smartest player on the team. And he's saying that from like a baseball IQ standpoint, like in the middle of the game, the heat of the moment, what decisions are all those little split-second decisions they're making.
Praise for a freshman.
But it's still incredible praise for a freshman. So I would be shocked if he doesn't play. And Jay's already said that he's going to play.
I'm excited to see him play, and I'm excited to see Schmidt pitch whenever whenever we see him pitch, because obviously he was a first rounder.
Yes,
and
he turned down millions of dollars to come here. That's a fact.
LSU, so.
I think the way to sum this up, as we are talking about obstacles on LSU's path toward Omaha, toward greatness this year, on paper, this could be a very exciting team. It is a very talented team. If they develop, and if the players who you think are going to hit your Curiels, your Schmidts, your Daniel Dickinson, the catchers who, they need somebody to step up there, like, man, they look formidable. They could be a national championship team. On the other hand, I just said a lot of ifs. So there are some pitfalls in there, and maybe the floor is a little bit lower.
Yeah, this team doesn't have the floor that the 2023 team had, but in terms of ceiling, they're not like terribly far off that team. That team is on its own stratosphere. Don't get me wrong, from a talent perspective, especially if you combine the talent and the floor, given how many returning starters they had on offense, it was ridiculous, right?
Well, the floor was Paul Skeens. That's a pretty high
we didn't
floor.
know Paul Skeens was going to raise the floor and the ceiling the way he did, because again, he came in as like a 2-way guy, and we thought, oh, now he's going to be a pitcher, and we've seen great stuff in the fall, but we didn't know that he was number 1 overall pick good, to be clear. But yeah, no, it's this is a very interesting team, and I'm very curious to see how it all sort of shakes out.
All right, so that's kind of the final word on LSU baseball. You guys want to give like a prediction, like how I mean, not an exact record or anything, but like Omaha, yay or nay?
I think they get to Omaha. They should at the very least. I keep on saying should, but if I'm saying should, then I should predict it. So okay. I think they will. Yeah,
I think they will. And again, it's kind of a crapshoot once you get there. Like, as great as that team was in 2023, if Trey Morgan doesn't make that amazing play at home plate, they lose to Wake Forest, and they don't even get to the championship series. So it can be very tough once you get there, and you need the breaks to go your way. But to get there, you have to expect that from this team.
All right, I'm just going to be contrarian and say no.
Sure.
I'm not.
It's
really,
baseball. You have a good chance
to be
convinced
of that, but all three of us saying yes would seem bad. So I'm going to say no. They fall short. Maybe a super regional. But it's hard to make it to Omaha.
Yeah,
it's hard. I don't care how good you are.
I mean, as much as last year's team struggled, they were 3-12 in conference play at one point, and they were losing even in the back half of the regular season. They were losing some games where I thought, oh, they can't get away with this, and yet that team was still 2 outs away
from the super, and from a super regional, in the super,
and that they would have hosted, and they would have gone to Omaha. So it seemed last year it seemed very far away, but it also wasn't.
That is true. And that's a good lesson. Like, if it's April 1st and we're like, I don't know, there's still a lot of time in that season. So I did want one more thing. This is a baseball preview podcast, but we would be remiss if we did not mention that tonight, Friday night, as you're watching or listening to this, at the PMAC is maybe the biggest event of the year, all year at the PMAC. And that's saying something, because the LSU women's basketball team is pretty darn good. But it is a gymnastics battle between number 2 in the country, LSU, and number 1, Oklahoma, quite possibly a preview of 2 of the teams you're going to see in the finals at the NCAA championships, Rab. And it, no matter what happens, it's going to be a show.
Yeah, it's tremendous. First time in 4 years, LSU's been in a 1-2 regular season meet. First time Oklahoma came here last year before they joined the SEC, and they met in a 4-team meet in Oklahoma City in January, but that did not count in the SEC standings. It's the first time they come here for an SEC dual meet, and they're number 1 and LSU is number 2. They were preseason 1 and 2. That's where their season averages are, and yeah, it's not something that gets a lot of attention, but for LSU, it's kind of an elimination meet to win the SEC regular season title. You can't expect Oklahoma to drop 2 meets if you don't win. So it's big, and it should be a show. It's 2 of the very best teams in the country. There are 4 regionals in gymnastics. You expect these to be 2 of the number 1 seeds in regionals and go on to finals. Last 2 national champions. Some of the best gymnasts in the country. Yeah, it's going to be show. Folks will be hanging from the catwalks, I think, for this one. It's going to be a full house of the PMAC, and I'm so glad that the baseball opener is scheduled for the afternoon, and this is at 8:00 at night. So you have to. I can go to the baseball game, then I can go to the
with the caveat that we're speaking on Wednesday, and we don't know if there's going to be weather changes to that schedule.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
Friday's looking okay.
But Friday's looking okay, but the point is, if Sunday's not, Friday's where they would move the game to.
That's fair. Yeah.
I don't know. Again,
I'm going to see some. I'm going to go see some baseball.
Check the schedule before you head out to LSU right. on this evening.
But it should be tremendous stuff. And just a couple of pointers, if I may. People are wondering about Haley Bryant. She's probably going to do 3 events again. She won't do uneven bars. Still recovering from that elbow injury she had in December. But Kaylin Chio, the freshman, talking about freshmen, she's been tremendous. She's won the last 2 all-around titles. The last 2 weeks, she was SEC Freshman of the Week. And then Oklahoma, they're just because LSU's best score of the season is better than Oklahoma's best score of the season. But Oklahoma is just so consistent. They're not going to have a 196. Koki was so kind to cover me. My son got married a few weeks ago.
Now. What are you talking about? Yeah.
He is. He covered the meet off of TV when LSU went to Arkansas and had a 196.6. Oklahoma's not going to come here and do that.
Yeah.
But you're going to have a good score to beat them, and LSU is capable of it.
And it's so funny you say that because it was last year, it was the consistency at the national meet that won it for LSU, while Oklahoma fell down.
They did, yeah.
In crunch time.
I mean, anybody's capable of. Florida just went to Arkansas, had a 48 something on beam, which is awful. Now anybody's capable of it, but it's the consistency that you're looking for.
The scoring really has the change in the scoring hasn't really affected Oklahoma much at all this year.
It hasn't changed the top of the standings of the top 4 teams in the country. LSU, Oklahoma, LSU, Florida, and Utah are the 4 teams you expected to see at the top of the national standings. That you expect to see be the maybe UCLA, who's number 5. You got to throw them in. They only have Jordan Childs on their team, the Olympian, but they're very consistent. And can I say one other thing about rankings in gymnastics? It's all on your average. So LSU could win this meet and still, they're going to be number 1. Well, no, they won't. Not necessarily. Yeah, Oklahoma would have to have a really poor score, and LSU would have a great score for them to do that. It's all going to be on average. So they'll probably still be 1 versus 2 come next week. But it's all based on average, and it's so much. Talk about get to Omaha. It's so much what you do at the end of the season. As Jay Clark has said many times, you can lose most of your meets and still win the national championship.
And you mentioned they played at the 4-way, or they met at the 4-way meet in Oklahoma City in January. This is meeting number 2. They'll meet again at the SEC championship, and then we think most likely at the national championship. So that last one is the one that's going to count. It doesn't matter if you win the first 3 or lose the first 3. That last one is going to be the one that everyone will remember.
It's a good checkup.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so again, covering gymnastics, baseball. We did basketball earlier this week. All the LSU sports that you can handle here on the LSU Sports Insider podcast. For our producer, Alex Lee, he's Koki Riley and Scott Rabalais. I'm Zach Ewing. Enjoy the baseball, the gymnastics, the basketball. Big weekend at LSU, and we will talk to you next week.